Galaxy 666 by Pel Toro. Session 16.
Galaxy 666 is certainly living up to her name, grinned Korzak. But what a name to live up to, mused Ishklaw. There's some names this galaxy's been called I wouldn't like to be called, said Korzak. Yes, the average old space veteran has a splendid flow of language. My old grandfather, said Korzak rather proudly, can go on for 25 Earth minutes without repeating himself, and he's a rapid talker, too. Man, said Bronet, he certainly is. Well, that's what I call a vocabulary. Korzak laughed. None of them had felt particularly humorous since they had arrived in this strange, frightening, forbidding corner of the universe. It also makes you think there's something in the old science numerology, said Bronet suddenly. How's that? Asked Korzak. Well, back on Earth they used to believe in it, apparently, centuries ago. Certain numbers had certain influences, special magical significances, all that kind of thing. 666 is the mark of the beast in Christian eschatology. It was actually a code name for Nero, a Caesar who was busy persecuting them when that particular piece of eschatological apocalyptic was written.
That's interesting, said Oski. There was another fellow who called himself the Great Beast. That would be many centuries later, back in the old 1920s. I remember reading about him somewhere. Odd character. Crawley or Crowley or some such name. Had a tradition for witchcraft. All that kind of stuff they used to go in for those days.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him, said Bronet. Korzak raised an eyebrow. You sound like a couple of professor historians comparing data, he said. It's a hobby with me, said Bronet.
Same here, said Oski.
We've amassed quite a little microfilm library between us. We've made several trips together in this wagon. We were together before that as well, before Skipper got his promotion. History's quite a hobby. It goes back a fair way. 30 or 40 centuries of accurately recorded history is a lot to analyze and study. It means that one man can only hope to have any kind of intimate or real knowledge of a very limited period. The oldest thing about history still holds true, in my opinion.
What's that? Asked Korzak.
The only thing that man learns from history is that man never learns from history. The same old cycles keep asserting themselves over and over again.
Well, there I disagree.
This is one of the things we'll always argue about,
said Oski.
He feels that inevitably, gradually, man is improving.
I would like to think that, said Korzak, but I'm not a historian.
Well, think of the Greeks,
said Oski.
Many centuries ago, the best part of 4,000 years, their civilization was at its height. Men like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Themistocles, Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, their thoughts, their writings, their philosophy, their mathematics, their science were incredibly good. If one of those men could be born now with the same basic intelligence as he had then, he'd be as good as any brain we've got in this empire.
He paused.
Then there was Leonardo da Vinci, the Italian genius. He could have taken his place in the empire. In fact, he could have been one of the leaders of the empire. He had a terrific brain, just held back by technology. We haven't advanced on men like that.
Yes, but men like that were the exception then. They're the rule now, surely. But are our best men better than theirs?
I would have said that the best and the worst men of any century were pretty well comparable, said Oski.
Well, there I would disagree with you, said Bronet. I would have thought that the worst men today were a darn sight better than the worst that history could produce. I would have said that the best men today were better than the best men history threw up. Let's take the fellow who runs a colony for those poor devils out on Galaxy 603. So far, medicine has found no cure for their complaint. They are condemned to a lingering death. It's contagious, and he knows it. He goes out and administers the colony for them, and they live comfortably and happily. Sooner or later, it'll get him, and he knows it. Who from the past could touch that? Oski looked triumphant.
There was Father Damien, he said. He did the same thing in a leper colony back on Earth.
Oh, you got a point there, said Bronet.
All right. There was that chap who opened up that new hospital on the fourth planet of Alpha Centauri back in the home galaxy. It's a swamp planet, and it's primitive. It's full of all the diseases the Empire tries to destroy and fight against. He's working there with limited resources against all kinds of disease and prejudice. He's trying to turn a race of submen into human beings.
Oh, I wouldn't say they were submen. I would say they were far worse than any of the primitive Earth races ever were. An Australian Aborigine of the 20th century would have been a university professor compared to one of those people. But I can give you a comparable figure from history. Look at a man like David Livingstone. He went to Africa and opened up a hospital for the men there. But they were ordinary men like himself. They weren't submen like these. Albert Schweitzer did the same thing. But again, he did it for his fellow men. He didn't do it for a subrace. But if you like to think of these submen as not completely human, think of men who gave their lives to animals, men who looked after bird sanctuaries, men who rescue wild game from natural and unnatural disasters.
You got a point there.
Look, it's about time we got out of here if we're going, said Korzak. We'll have to decide on a landing course, or are we going to abandon the whole project and get back?
I think we ought to vote on it, said Bronet.
That's a good idea, a very good idea.
All those in favor of going back?
Oski shook his head.
I'd rather not,
he said.
I'm in favor of trying to accomplish something.
Well, that's one for landing somewhere if we can find a place, said Korzak. Captain Bronet, how do you feel?
I'd rather try for a landing. I'm with Oski, said Bronet.
Well, the success of this project means more to us than it does to you, said Ishklaw. I'm for landing. Korzak grinned. Well, just for the record, I'm for landing too, he said. But now that you three have cast your votes, it doesn't matter a hoot what I think, does it?
In a vote like this, I'd say any man had the power of the veto, said Ishklaw. If one man doesn't want to go, then we'll all go back. That's fair enough, and no hard feelings or recriminations.
I'd still cast my vote the same way, said Korzak. I think we ought to go and see if we can land somewhere. I'd like to see if my experiences on that planet coincide with Grandfather's. Boy, I'll have a tale to spin those two old tail spinners if and when we ever get back, he laughed. They'll be treating me to Alco for a month just to hear it again.
Provided they can get it at Space Veterans concession rates, they won't be far out of pocket, laughed Ishklaw.
Here ends Session 16.